year 1957. The United States learns a new word, Sputnik, and faces a new reality. Its days of unquestioned leadership in science and technology are over. The year 1973. The Arab oil embargo hits, and suddenly, Detroit's domination of the U.S. car market is threatened by low-priced, fuel-efficient imports from Japan. By the early 1980s, Ford Motor Company, where the modern automobile industry began, is awash in red ink. The year 1989. The Berlin Wall falls and the Cold War ends, bringing a chill to U.S. corporations that depend on the Pentagon for their daily bread. One of those companies is Galileo Electro-Optics of Sturbridge, Massachusetts. Galileo, a designer and builder of night vision equipment, is good at what they do, but when the wall comes tumbling down, so do their profits.
What ties these stories together? Well, in each instance, a highly successful enterprise lost crucial ground to the competition because it did not see change coming and was unprepared to deal with it when it arrived. These days, perhaps more than ever, companies can't afford such mistakes. Change, sometimes drastic change, is in the air, with product cycles shorter, competition global, and shareholders more demanding. As a result, companies and their managements need to be nimble, to anticipate and then respond to events in a world growing less predictable and more competitive by the day. Now, many observers of the business world are convinced that the way to succeed in this rapidly changing marketplace is to develop a coherent strategy of competitive advantage.
What we're talking about right now is the basis of competitive advantage. How do firms build competitive advantage? And when you think about building competitive advantage, it is a tall order because you're competing in a marketplace with high-intensity competition.
Professor Harbir Singh of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania is a leading authority on competitive advantage and corporate strategy. He writes and consults extensively on the subject, and in this program will share his views on how to gain and maintain competitive advantage. We'll also hear from senior executives and managers who wrestle with these issues every day. Let's start with a simple definition. Just what is competitive advantage?
Competitive advantage is the ability to provide a superior product or service to the consumer. It's very important that it should be thought of in the eyes of the consumer because they are the ones who reward the firm in terms of its ability to compete and provide the product or service.
How can a company achieve competitive advantage? Professor Singh has identified three major factors which he believes can take a company and make it an industry leader. The three factors are positioning in the industry, leveraging capabilities, and neutralizing competition. Professor Singh explains.
One is, how do you position yourself in the industry? Are you positioned in a way that you actually do provide a superior product or service, a product or service that the market values, that the market rewards?
In other words, are you positioned where you are most likely to do well? Singh cites Coca-Cola as a classic example.
If you think about Coca-Cola and its positioning in the industry, we often wonder, why is Coca-Cola successful? Is it successful because of its formula, because of the taste? Or is it successful because of the marketing? What is it that drives success? When you look at the soft drink industry closely, what you see is the real success is in how they chose the activities that they would participate in. They don't participate heavily in bottling. They're doing that now, but they weren't doing in the beginning of the industry. They were participating in producing the syrup and in marketing. And they had thousands of bottlers around in various parts of the world who were doing the bottling and distribution and so on. And you could argue that this is a good example of how do you choose your activities so that you're in the profit drivers. The profit drivers are in concentrate and in marketing, building the image, consumer goodwill. It's not in the intermediate steps.
To position yourself well in an industry, according to Professor Singh, in turn requires three critical steps. First, you must identify entry barriers. In the car business, for instance, entry barriers include the huge startup costs and the need to market worldwide. In the perfume business, a barrier is the need to have an established brand name. Second, you must identify attractive segments. Again, in the automobile industry, luxury cars and sports utility vehicles with their high and profitable markups are particularly appealing to manufacturers. Third, you must understand the nature of the competitive game. Is your firm's competition more cost-based, as in the steel industry, or more marketing-based, as in soft drinks, where brand names hold leverage, or more knowledge-based, as in computer software? Can you change the nature of the competition by changing the rules of the game, as we'll later see Southwest Airlines did in its industry? With that brief introduction to positioning, we can move on to the second of Professor Singh's 3 determinants of competitive advantage.
The second factor is leveraging my firm's capabilities. And here what we're talking about is leveraging your, of course, your financial capabilities, but besides that, your human resources, your technology, your brand identification, your consumer goodwill, your reputation.
In other words, you find an area in which you've got an edge on the competition and then play to that strength for all you're worth. Singh cites Microsoft as a prime example.
If you look at a company like Microsoft, which is in the knowledge business, it's very interesting how you create value in that business, because ultimately you have software engineers, you have marketing professionals, you have a group of professionals that other firms also have access to. So what does Microsoft do differently? What Microsoft did differently was they were able to control the industry's standards. They were able to position themselves so that their product was the standard. And what they did was to come up with products that were placed in the highest volume computer hardware that was in the industry. And over time, despite the fact that the standard that they used, whether it was MS-DOS or Windows, was not technically superior to any of the others, they were able to control the marketplace through sheer volume, through the network of users that they had, who then were, in a sense, looking for compatibility with the Microsoft standard. And so here, in a sense, when you talk about leveraging capability, you're leveraging the capability around a user base, a very vast and interconnected user base that becomes an asset that the firm can then tap into for future products.
Another way in which companies leverage their capabilities, says Singh, is by forging strategic alliances. That is, by seeking out partners who are strong in areas where they themselves are not. Increasingly, corporations are turning to such alliances to help them do things they might not be able to do on their own.
Alliances are a fascinating development in the world of competitive strategy. What firms are doing is they're going beyond their boundaries. They're saying our existing resources are insufficient to build advantage in the long term. We have to partner with people, even people who we hate in the marketplace. We still have to partner with them. And we have to forge this compromise arrangement long enough so that both sides can benefit from it. Now, having said that, it sounds like it's sort of a half-baked compromise solution, but really what you have to do is change your mindset also, and change your mindset within the alliance of cooperation, a win-win mindset, and really get both organizations to put their resources into that joint relationship.
One good example of such an alliance is Fuji Xerox, a partnership established between 2 powerful companies to sell machines for reproducing as well as digitizing business documents. Japan had leapfrogged the U.S. in copying technology. The partnership was Xerox's effort to leap back.
In Japan.
Paul Allaire is Xerox's chairman and chief executive.
In fact, Fuji Xerox has as large or greater market share in Japan than we have in the United States. And having a very successful presence in your competitor's market, particularly if your competitor is Japanese, is very, very important strategically. Now, we didn't recognize that and didn't understand that when we set up Fuji Xerox, clearly. But having them be there and having them be successful is absolutely essential. So all of the issues that you hear American manufacturers complaining about in terms of the unfair practices that you have in Japan, we don't suffer from them at all because we have a Japanese company in Japan.
Yataro Kobayashi, the head of Fuji Xerox, believes the alliance enables each firm to leverage the other's domestic strengths in an increasingly global world.
If you put Xerox and Fuji Xerox together, it's a massive resources, and which can be put to very, very good use if we can manage that well. It's a global company, and global reach of Xerox is very important, and certainly we will take advantage of that.
In fact, by leveraging their combined technological and marketing capabilities, the 2 companies are now seeking to develop the fast-expanding Asian market in a way that neither company could do alone.
In the 80s, the whole game became a little more sophisticated. We had to continue becoming competitive in the broader range of businesses. We were becoming more systems-oriented as compared to a fairly single-line product company in the reprographics. The degree of cooperation between Xerox and Fuji Xerox became not only necessary, but absolute necessity. Since the 80s, this co-destiny strategy and really coordinating our strategies with Xerox at the highest level and making possible for our own joint ventures in the areas that we operate: Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Philippines, and companies in Indonesia.
Harbir Singh stresses the importance of alliances as a way for firms to address the global marketplace and to acquire local knowledge which they cannot have in their headquarters operations.
And so, in a sense, because of globalization today in the various markets, we are seeing lots of alliances entering China, Eastern Europe, and so on. And the real question is, how long will these alliances last? And I think the way we want to look at that is to say, I want to be in an alliance as long as it will build my capabilities and my competitive advantage.
Professor Singh sees three key requirements for the leveraging of capabilities. First, capabilities must be unique, as in Xerox's ability to be a worldwide player in its industry with strong North American, European, and Asian operations. This combines well with the company's high name recognition and worldwide reputation for excellence in products and services. Second, capabilities must be difficult to replicate. Coca-Cola's image in the soft drink industry and its global presence in the beverage industry are obvious examples. We'll also see this later with Southwest Airlines, which so far has managed to stay ahead of imitators. And third, says Professor Singh, capabilities should be applicable to a wide range of markets to maximize their effects in multiple products and services. For an example of wide applicability and leveraging, let's return to Xerox and examine its Xsoft division. Xsoft took the Xerox brand name, with its reputation as the document company, and leveraged it into the growing software business, an area that Xerox identified as one in which it wanted to be positioned. Today, Xsoft is a technological leader in producing document management software for the business and consumer markets, giving Xerox competitive advantage in multiple markets. Further, Xsoft leveraged Xerox's research strength, symbolized by its famous Palo Alto Research Center, or PARC. PARC scientists played a critical role in developing a number of Xsoft's leading software products. Conversely, Xsoft is helping Xerox get into new and promising fields of technology.
Right, and the question that's come up 2 or 3 times, can offline be the network?
Yes.
Yes. Dennis Andrews is the president of Xsoft.
Network as easily as it would if it were a diskette. Okay, good. The document means a lot more than just paper. We sometimes call it the information object for those people who get a little bit stuck with document meaning paper. Here at Xsoft, we don't get stuck, however. As you'll see, there's no toner underneath these fingernails. We do deal with electronic documents, and that's the focus. It's fun to be here almost as a spectator and watch the impact across all of Xerox as that changes. The exciting part is that what we're doing here, although it is closely aligned with the research up the hill at PARC, but also that alignment is converging with what the rest of Xerox is doing. I think perhaps we're moving a little bit, but also the rest of Xerox is moving, because today, when we think of a copier, we have to recognize that it's becoming a digital device.
In sum, then, Professor Singh says leveraging capabilities to create new products and services, as Xerox did with Xsoft, is critical to gaining competitive advantage. Having covered positioning and leveraging, we now come to the last element of Harbir Singh's triad.
The third element is neutralizing competition. When competition responds to your style of doing business, are you able to neutralize them and do one better than them? Are you able to stay a step ahead?
That, Singh cautions, is not easy to do. As an example, he cites the frequent flyer program, a genuine innovation that in the beginning gave its originator, American Airlines, a competitive edge, but soon proved susceptible to imitation.
If you look at frequent flyer programs, what you see is perhaps they were introduced originally to build loyalty of the consumer, so that you reward consumers for flying more on your airline, but that's a completely replicable move. And so what we see here is all the frequent flyer programs mirroring each other. And in fact, they have become essentially a discount in kind program as opposed to a loyalty building program. So that's a good example of not neutralizing competition.
In neutralizing competition, Singh says a company must consider 3 critical issues. First, rivalry. How much of a threat is your rival? In the personal computer business, for example, IBM was hurt when competitors proved willing and able to sell IBM clones for substantial discounts. Second, competitor capabilities. What does your competitor do well? And can you do it better? We'll see how Ford used this in designing its Taurus. And third, barriers to strategy imitation. How difficult would it be for competitors to copy or otherwise neutralize your strategy? If you cut prices, for example, the competition can quickly follow suit. On the other hand, a strategy that successfully enhances quality is much more difficult to imitate. So, recapping briefly, the pursuit of competitive advantage, says Professor Singh, boils down to 3 basic questions. Are you well positioned in the industry? Are you effectively leveraging your capabilities? And are you neutralizing your competition? As Singh points out, though, companies often run into trouble trying to put the theory into practice.
I would say that the key question is how good are they at actually answering those questions we were talking about? And then further, questions about positioning in the industry, leveraging capabilities, and neutralizing competition. And then the question really is, how good are they at implementing what the answers are from those questions? And I think that is what generates variation in outcomes. Are they really implementing what they come up with as answers? Are they willing to confront change? And so on. That is where there's lots of variation.
Now that we've been introduced to Professor Singh's competitive advantage triad, let's take a look at some companies that have put these ideas to good use. Our examples include a large company, Ford, a mid-sized company, Southwest Airlines, and a smaller firm, Galileo Electro-Optics. First, let's consider Ford. As we'll see, Ford's dramatic turnaround in the mid-'80s can be used as a model of how the triad works. But before we look at what the company has done right, it's instructive to go back and see what they did wrong, how they lost an earlier competitive advantage. That story dates back to the go-go 60s, when America's automobile industry was at its peak. Americans were seeing the USA in their Chevrolet or their Ford or Plymouth. It was a time of big cars, cheap gas, and no significant foreign competition.
The American auto producers were dominant at the time. They felt that they could control the pace of the industry, product development, and so on. And so, in a sense, what happened was they lost track of the consumer and what the consumer was looking for. Also, at that time, as time went on, the oil crisis of the mid-'70s came along, and fuel efficiency became a major factor in the purchase of the automobile. And it turned out that the American auto producers were tooled up for large cars with high levels of fuel consumption. And so we had a problem where they were just not connected with what the consumer wanted.
In other words, says Singh, the big 3 forgot the triad. First and foremost, in terms of positioning, they ignored the new, fast-growing economy segment of the car market and failed to see that the nature of the competitive game was changing to smaller and better.
It's much easier to assume that the rules of competition are the same because then you can pursue the same procedures, the same assumptions. When you think the rules of competition are changing, it's disruptive. And when it's disruptive, then the whole power structure rebels against it.
Why?
Well, the power structure rebels against it because people are carrying certain comfortable assumptions about how to compete. And those assumptions are tried and true. It seems like we know what the rules of competition are. We know that the assumption is we know that these are transient changes, that the customer will in fact return to what they have always rewarded us for. And I think that is the dangerous assumption, and you could call it complacency, but I don't think it's just complacency. It is carrying a certain mental model of how to succeed. And that mental model is hard to revise because there's a whole superstructure of decision-making, of physical assets, of factories, of tooling, and so on that are behind those assumptions.
Not surprisingly, once the big 3 missed the changing of the competitive game, they could no longer leverage their capabilities, their venerable brand names, their vast design, engineering, and other resources. As for neutralizing the competition, well, the big 3 were letting foreign competition neutralize them. For the Ford Motor Company, the reversal must have been especially painful. This company had lost its competitive advantage once before. Ford was where the automobile industry, in a sense, began. Henry Ford's assembly line changed manufacturing forever. It enabled his fledgling company to produce quality cars at affordable prices and to dominate the industry for a decade. That era abruptly ended in the 20s, when General Motors came up with an idea nearly as revolutionary as the assembly line, namely customer choice. Where Ford had basically one model, GM offered options, different colors, different body styles, different engines, different brand names. For the next half-century, Ford would run behind GM, but over that span, both companies sold a lot of cars and produced a lot of profit. At least until the late 70s, when new players, the Japanese, appeared on the scene. According to Professor Singh, Toyota, Nissan, and Honda captured market share by remembering the same basic lesson that Detroit appeared to have forgotten. When the competitive game changes, you have to change with it. As it happened, the big shift in the automobile industry towards smaller and better worked to the advantage of the Japanese. For one thing, they were already building smaller, more fuel-efficient cars to sell at home. For another, they had learned the value of quality. According to Mike Useem, a colleague of Harbir Singh's at Wharton, it was knowledge gained over time and by various means.
In the early post-war period in Japan, Mr. Toyota had actually sought to copy Ford's mass production. He sent an engineer to look at how Ford did it in the early days in post-war reconstruction. The message came back, here's how you do it. Toyota said, okay, and he went to the banks to try to obtain a large amount of credit to, among other things, have these large inventories of parts and bumpers and windows that would then be assembled, which is part of what mass production is all about. The bank said, thank you, Mr. Toyota, for your query here. There is no credit in this country. This is a post-war country. You've got to solve this in some other way. Or he said that to himself. What he did in solving that problem was invent the famous just-in-time inventory system. No bank credit to have an inventory. All right, I won't have one. And out of that came the JIT system, as it's called, just-in-time inventory. And the great, in a sense, serendipitous discovery is that if you have no inventory, it drives quality in an extremely powerful fashion. No inventory means if there's a mistake with a part coming in, you know that instantly.
So when the automobile game changed, the Japanese were able to leverage long-established capabilities that suddenly counted for a lot, and that their U.S. counterparts simply didn't have. As a result, by 1980, American car sales were plummeting. Chrysler was virtually bankrupt, and Ford was not far behind. The company had lost its competitive advantage, says Professor Singh, and Ford managers knew it. Dick Van House is Ford's executive director for worldwide planning and strategy.
In my first job, I was responsible for the Thunderbird Cougar, the 1980 Thunderbird Cougar that we had just launched. And they were not very good products. I was embarrassed, and I use myself as an example, of course. We have the opportunity to drive any vehicle in the lineup. And in the late 70s, very early 80s, it was difficult to select a car that you really wanted to drive.
So Ford decided to go back to basics. As quality seemed to be the key to the new competitive game in the auto industry, Ford made quality job one.
Probably the most dramatic signal that was sent by this company to the need to change in the area of quality was when Red Poling, who was the head of NAO at that time, as I said, in 1980, closed down 2 assembly plants. He picked one of them because it had the worst quality we built. Said, we're not going to do it. That sent a signal. And after that, things really started to change.
When you think about quality and how you deliver quality, as you know, there's a whole industry around quality management, total quality, and so on. And in many ways, I think that is good because delivering quality is a change in mindset. It is not just tracking defect rates per 1,000 items produced. It is a change in mindset where we go and pursue all the different sources of quality. We try to bring the consumer into the discussion. And I think Ford did a lot of that. The reason why they had to do it was that's what the consumer was rewarding.
When Ford decided to emphasize quality, they borrowed a tactic the Japanese have used to good advantage. Study the competition and then go them one better. In this case, the competition was those very same Japanese, and the result, Ford believes, is that its manufacturing process is today among the best in the business.
Mercedes-Benz is building a plant in the United States, and they've been quoted as saying that they're looking at the Ford manufacturing process because Ford has actually become the leader in manufacturing, which is something that makes us feel very good. We think we still have an awful lot of work to do in our manufacturing processes, but it's nice to be seen as leading.
Ford took the lead in manufacturing and product design as well. At that time, it was something of a stretch.
Ford Motor Company had a kind of maybe it was an unwritten philosophy of following rather than really trying to lead. And we spent a lot of time looking at our major competitor down the street and trying to offer products that might be able to compete with our competition rather than trying to develop products that would meet the needs of our customers.
Consistent with its newfound awareness of the changing competitive game, Ford went back to the drawing board, literally for fresh ideas and designs. In 1986, the company unveiled the first fruit of that labor, the Taurus. In the language of Professor Singh's triad, the goal was to position Ford in a key and profitable part of the industry, the family sedan segment, and to do so by leveraging Ford's design and manufacturing capabilities.
We bet the farm on the Taurus. We knew kind of what General Motors was going to do, which would have been the safe course, or we could chart our own course. And in doing so, we brought the Taurus out, which clearly turned the fortunes around for the Ford Motor Company. There's a saying that goes that if you're going to sail the high seas and explore distant shores, you got to lose sight of the shore you're leaving. And that's what we did with the Taurus.
It was a risky strategy, but it worked. Taurus turned Ford around, and by 1995, the company had 4 of the 5 best-selling vehicles in the United States. What did it, Singh says, was changing with the game, shrewd positioning, and close attention to the other points of the triad as well.
In terms of leveraging capabilities, what they did was they tied in with market research. They really took what the consumer wanted based on their market research very seriously and came up with the design features that would respond to that marketplace. So again, tying very tightly the marketing considerations with the production considerations and coming up with a design that can be produced relatively efficiently and still at a high quality.
By leveraging their capabilities, that is, by playing to their strengths, Ford also succeeded at the third part of Professor Singh's formula, neutralizing the competition.
When we look at the Taurus, what we're saying here is that in terms of the determinants of competitive advantage, positioning in the industry, leveraging capabilities, and neutralizing competition, this was a move that gave Ford a lot of advantage over time. It became the industry standard, a product where they did not enjoy industry standard for a long time. It became the industry standard, particularly in terms of neutralizing competition. And one of the points we want to make there is in the auto industry, it takes a long time to come up with a new design. It takes more than 3 years to come up with a new design. So if you have a successful new design, then the rivalry in the industry is going to take place around that design. But if it becomes an industry standard, you have some leadership position. You have the ability to generate some returns from that.
Further, Singh points out that while Ford was astute at reading the market and responding to customer needs, the Japanese, who once excelled at this, have missed several new market opportunities in the U.S., including sports utility vehicles, vans, and trucks. As a result, in these areas, they have lost their competitive advantage back to the U.S., suggesting, says Professor Singh, that no competitive advantage is permanent.
One of the things I hope we will take away from this automobile industry example is that, in fact, you may be on top in one period, but that doesn't mean you'll be on top in the next period, because everyone is trying to see why you're on top, and they're trying to compete against you and neutralize your moves and so on. So that's one reason why Toyota and others did not do well in the auto industry, in the light truck industry, is just because of their inability to maintain that success. But there's a deeper reason. The deeper reason is that they were drawing upon their experience in the Japanese home market in the passenger segment. The market turned in their favor when it moved towards smaller and more fuel-efficient cars. And then as we moved into the 90s, the market moved towards light trucks, where in fact there wasn't a large home market. There was not the ability to test various prototypes out and see which ones work best in terms of consumer preference and so on. So they were caught with a reverse problem, that now in fact they were trying to catch up with what the US producers had been doing in the US for a long time.
Mike Useem agrees that competitive advantage should never be taken for granted.
It's tough to get, but once you get it, it's great to have. And lots of companies have shown that if they can find a way to have an advantage and they know how to recreate it, reinvent it, they can often coast along for years with it. But it can also disappear very fast. Right. And maybe one message on that is that you've got to really think about how to reinvent your competitive advantage, to sustain it, to recreate it. And so if you rest on your laurels, you're in trouble on competitive advantage.
So with Ford, we saw a good example of a company using Professor Singh's triad. It leveraged its manufacturing and design capabilities, positioned itself in the family car segment, and then neutralized the competition by coming up with a car design that set the standard for years to come. But impressive as this accomplishment was, even in the bad times, Ford could find some reassurance knowing that people were still buying cars. The market was always there to be regained. Now imagine waking up one day to discover that your principal customer, in effect your entire market, has disappeared for good. That's pretty much what happened to Bill Hanley at Galileo Electro-Optics. When the Cold War ended, his principal customer, the US government, simply stopped buying. Unfortunately, working for Uncle Sam had not conditioned Hanley or his company for the real world of market competition.
We sat and waited for the phone to ring. The government calls all the shots. They tell the prime contractors exactly what they need. The prime contractors roll that through to us. We're on the bottom of the food chain, if you will. You really don't make decisions about your business. You make decisions about how you're going to react, how you're going to schedule, how you're going to procure. But you really don't make decisions about how you manage your business. Your business is managed for you, if you will.
It was the late fall of 1990. Hanley realized that his company was headed for hard times. He gathered his employees to warn them.
We're all watching the dollars we spend these days, and we're keeping spending under control, anticipating a pretty rough 1991 as far as the economy is concerned.
A few months later, a quarter of people Hanley had addressed were gone, laid off forever. And that was still not the bottom. In 1993, Galileo's government business had dropped so precipitously that the company lost $10.5 million on $34 million in sales. The first question that Hanley asked as he sought to turn things around was, what were Galileo's unique capabilities? And how could they be leveraged in ways that would also reposition the company to compete effectively in a brand new competitive game?
That was the crux of the problem. How do we survive when all we know how to do is make components for military night vision devices? We had to reinvent ourselves from scratch in order to survive. What we ended up defining ourselves as is we are in the signal acquisition and delivery business. We are not in the night vision business. We do signal acquisition and delivery for our customer.
In a very short period of time, Galileo reinvented itself around its central capability, moving electronic information such as data or images from one place to another. Galileo had unique ways of doing this that were very difficult to replicate and potentially applicable to a wide range of markets. Professor Singh's three key requirements for leveraging in pursuit of competitive advantage. But it was still a tall order to exploit these capabilities, so Galileo went to work developing fiber optic components for lasers, medical equipment, even Xerox copiers. Then the company had to learn a brand new skill, how to court customers. To succeed at that, Hanley and Company also had to learn how to produce high-quality products for substantially lower costs with fewer people. And all this in the midst of record losses.
The process of implementing strategy or execution at the point in time when you realize your world has changed dramatically is probably the most difficult part of the whole process. Up until it actually happens, you have plans on paper, you have ideas, you have thoughts, you have your team understanding those things, that the world is changing. Everything is changing around you. Things are about to be different, dramatically different than they were before. But nobody's played the game yet. That's the difference. Then the day comes when you have to suit up and go out onto the field and compete.
And compete they did. After 6 straight years of losses, Galileo went from 90% defense sales to 96% consumer sales and began to earn a profit.
This is a fascinating example. When you look at Galileo, what you see is a company that you would say is going to go out of business because such a large proportion of their revenues is dependent upon a single consumer in the defense industry. How are you going to respond when that demand goes away? And what we see is a company that was actually able to redeploy its capabilities, to leverage its capabilities into new segments. And what they essentially did was they realized this is not a small change. So they changed literally everything. They changed the vision of the company. They changed how the products were being designed. They brought the customers into the company in terms of product design. They changed the culture of the organization, that now we're not in a cost-plus business anymore. We are now in a business where we have to really sell the product, and we have to sell the product at a competitive price. And they also were able to do this in a relatively short time frame. So I think this is a very good example of how you can restructure a company, literally reinvent it, using essentially a subset of the capabilities that have market value, and to sort out what has market value and be very bold in pushing that initiative. And again, if they had done anything intermediate, if they had sort of said, well, we'll try to do this conversion into consumer marketing, but we'll also scale down in the defense business, I think that would not have been as successful. It was really the bold initiative that we will go aggressively after the other applications of our capabilities that made them work.
Galileo, like Ford, was successful because it was able to position, leverage, and eventually neutralize the competition. But Professor Singh sees something else in the Galileo story that's critical to regaining competitive advantage. Bill Hanley's success not only illustrates the 3 steps of the triad, but also shows how they can be used to develop what Professor Singh calls a strategic vision. Simply put, strategic vision is the ability to express in a few words where your company's going and how it'll get there. In the case of Galileo, that vision was a simple but transforming insight articulated at the top. Hanley's company was in the signal delivery business.
Bill Hanley's insight, says Professor Singh, meets 3 tests that Singh considers essential to a successful strategic vision. First, it was action-oriented. Second, it spurred employees to new levels of performance. Finally, it reflected the company's core values. This concept of strategic vision, says Singh, applies in all walks of competitive life. Take the space program, with which we began. In the late 1950s, the U.S. not only lost its competitive advantage to the Soviets in space, but witnessed failure after embarrassing failure on the launch pad. In large part, Singh says, the problem was lack of a coherent strategic vision. In 1961, President Kennedy solved that problem.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
Kennedy's stirring words, says Singh, galvanized the NASA engineers and scientists, motivating them to regain the U.S.'s competitive advantage in space. On July 20th, 1969, they put a man on the moon, achieving President Kennedy's well-defined strategic vision.
The success of Galileo's strategic vision suggests that this concept is not just for charismatic politicians. In fact, a clear and coherent strategic vision has also proved crucial to the success of the last company we'll look at, Southwest Airlines.
We really have never changed who we are. We're still today what we started out being, and we're still in existence for the same reasons that we started out. that we think that the public out there wants a good quality for a good price, and they want it with just decent, almost I would say common sense customer service approach, you know, by people that are glad that you want to give them your business.
Southwest has done extremely well with its strategic vision. The company has been profitable for more than 20 years, and that's in an industry where profits are rare. Professor Singh attributes this success in large measure to Southwest's strength on all 3 points in his triad. 1, position. Southwest decided not to compete with the majors and fly transcontinental flights or use the expensive hub-and-spoke approach. It is an airline devoted to low-cost, short-haul flights and going point to point. What's their competition?
We consider our competition to be the automobile, because one of our challenges with the short-haul nature of our business is to get people out of their cars into the air, and to get people who would not ordinarily fly to think about flying, particularly when you talk about the leisure-type traveler.
2, leverage. Unlike Ford, Xerox, or Galileo, airlines have little technology to leverage. And when Southwest started, the company certainly didn't have a brand name. What Southwest leveraged was its employees, who were trained to work hard and satisfy customer needs.
Our people are just sort of a notch above others. They're people that are very altruistic, people that want to be part of teams.
3, neutralize. Southwest continues to excel at neutralizing the competition. Few companies can compete with Southwest's ability to deliver good service on time at low cost. If you want to understand Southwest's competitive advantage and what makes it so hard for others to copy its success, visit Love Field in Dallas sometime. Love Field is Southwest's home base. Stand there and watch as the passengers check in for the 10:50 a.m. flight to Austin. The process looks distinctly low-tech. There are no computer-printed tickets. But the boarding process requires few people. Customers are treated well, with no wasted time. All employees do their part to make the process work.
We have our positions, our titles. However, I think that we all feel like, all the employees of Southwest Airlines feel like one big team. And we'll do whatever it takes to help out another employee in their position. For example, there's many times that customer service agents flying on their own personal time, if they're in another station, another city, they see a long line, maybe they'll go up and start pulling tickets to speed up the process. The pilots will get behind the ticket counter and they'll just say hi to our customers. We have ramp agents that will, they'll be up on the concourse, they'll be in operations, they'll help the operations agent. So we don't really perform like, this is my job description. We're going to do whatever it takes.
At 10:35, right on time, a plane arrives at the gate from Houston. This is the plane that's due to fly to Austin in 15 minutes at 10:50. In that short time, the Houston passengers and their baggage are unloaded, the plane cleaned and fueled, and the Austin passengers and their baggage checked in and loaded on. Promptly at 10:50, the plane pulls out, bound for Austin. There will be few frills and no meals on this flight, but the price is low, the probability of on-time arrival high.
We pride ourselves in our on-time performance. We stress it, we push it, we say, look, forget everything else. If the passenger doesn't get there when they need to get there, they're going to forget all the other good things that you want. So you don't hold airplanes for late running customers and that sort of thing.
Southwest's formula is straightforward enough, but it's also difficult to imitate, although many have tried. The company flies short-haul routes and does it well with a very small workforce. Employees work hard and work well as team members, and their high productivity means higher than average profit margins. It's this workforce, energetic and highly motivated, that makes it possible for the company to turn planes around in 15 minutes and to succeed in a fiercely competitive field. By leveraging the capabilities of its workforce, Southwest has gained a unique competitive advantage in an industry where such an advantage is rare.
They position themselves in the real short-haul flights in a regional setting and were able, therefore, to keep their cost structure low. And at the same time, what they did was that would not be sufficient. That is a niche, that is a position in the industry, but then you have to think about the capabilities you need to draw the customers to yourself. As the people in Southwest say, they are an efficient airline, so they're able to provide lower fares, but that doesn't mean that the quality is lower. And that is the distinction they draw between them and some of the other lower cost airlines or the cheaper fare airlines, that they really were efficient and yet providing a quality service. And how did they do it? They did it by empowering employees. They did it by having employees who owned stock in the company, employees who felt that their opinions were valued, employees who felt that they could be entrepreneurial, employees who felt that they were an integral part of the airline and they were really the face of the airline. So that, and that is true. As someone who would fly in an airline, of course, your experience is with the people who give you the service. That is your direct experience. So I think they had the right human resource policies for the strategy that they were pursuing.
What about neutralizing the competition?
One of the biggest things when you think about neutralizing competition is how easy is it for someone to replicate my strategy? And it turns out that this strategy that Southwest was following is hard to replicate, particularly in the human resource arena, because you're pursuing the strategy of empowering employees and getting them involved in service at a time when the industry is going through a massive restructuring. And the people at Southwest talk about the fact that they were a startup, and so they were able to build and grow to the right size for the kind of business they were in, the kind of concept of business they were in. And that made it very hard for competition to neutralize their move, because competition could not provide that level of service at that level of efficiency.
As a footnote to the Southwest case, Professor Singh cites one final component of the quest for competitive advantage. Southwest's success, Singh contends, is rooted in an organizational context that enables the company's key components, workforce, incentive systems, structures, and corporate culture to operate effectively in concert with each other and in pursuit of company goals.
That brief introduction to the concept of organizational context brings us to the end of our presentation, or nearly anyway. Before closing, we thought a quick summary of what we've learned would be useful. Southwest, Ford, Galileo, Xerox, all in their different ways used competitive advantage to make themselves leaders in their respective industries and to regain or maximize market share. All paid close attention to the three elements of what Professor Singh has called the competitive advantage triad.
Once again, these are positioning in the industry, leveraging capabilities, and neutralizing the competition. In turn, Singh says, these elements need to be guided by a strategic vision that focuses everyone in the organization on achieving competitive advantage. And finally, a successful company will have an organizational context that integrates employees, culture, incentive systems, and structures in concerted pursuit of that vision. In the end, though, Professor Singh reiterates a crucial caveat. No competitive advantage is permanent.
You have to keep thinking about how you can reinvent your basis of competition, how you can stay ahead of the marketplace. And in some ways, what you want to do is to try to discover what the new rules of the game are going to be, because you have your strategy based on the existing rules of the game. Are you able to anticipate the next game?
Ford, in fact, recently redesigned the Taurus, hoping again to neutralize the competition. The company has also launched a new initiative that represents its strategic vision for the rest of this decade, Ford 2000.
Ford 2000 is probably the most significant change in Ford Motor Company since we introduced mass production many years ago. It's much more than a reorganization of the company. It's a complete different approach to thinking about the automotive business. And what it is changing the way we work, changing all our processes, focusing on conducting the business in a global way rather than a regional way, which we did in the past.
They're placing a bet that the rules of competition in the auto industry are going to be relatively similar in different parts of the world, so that I should produce cars that essentially are going to be sold with minor modifications in different regions of the world. And that's a pretty strong assumption. I think if it works, then clearly Ford is making the right moves. So Global 2000 by Ford is a move that presumes that the industry is going to become more globalized and preferences are going to become more standardized. So we have to have connections between the US and the foreign operation in terms of design, in terms of engineering, and so on, and produce roughly the same automobile.
In short, Professor Singh warns, the pursuit of competitive advantage invariably involves risk, the willingness to bet on one horse rather than another. Singh offers a last word of advice about how to do that successfully.
What you have to do is concentrate on the fundamentals that generate economic value in the industry, and those fundamentals can actually be quite enduring. It is a question of how you leverage your capabilities to get to those fundamentals that requires continuous change. And so I think the question is, what is true north, what is the lodestone? It really is based on analyzing the industry and determining what are the sources of value, and am I positioning myself to actually appropriate and get those sources of value or not?
The answers to these questions, says Professor Singh, are key to developing strategies you can use to gain competitive advantage for your company. But to maintain your company's success, these strategies must also be supported, Singh contends, by strong organizational structures and systems. In part 2 of our series, we'll look closely at the internal organizational drivers of competitive advantage: decision-making, structures, incentives, and leadership. We'll see you then. For the Wharton School, I'm Paul Solman.